All right, everybody. Welcome to season 4 of Paperboy Ventures Deals. I'm Kyle, your host and founder of Paperboy, and we are really excited to bring this new season of content to you throughout the year. Quick refresher on our first 3 seasons over the past 2 years as we've come a long way since launch. Since then, we've helped tell the story of 26 impressive founders and brands across early stage CPG, people building the next generation of great consumer brands in food, beverage, and personal care. But this season is different. We're now investing directly in every brand and founder we bring on the pod throughout season 4, finally putting our money where our mic is. Today's episode features Ripi Foods and founder CEO Ian Tecklin, our very first investment out of Paperboy Fund I. I'll leave it to Ian to tell the full story, but Ripi is a premium frozen pasta brand taking on one of the most overlooked categories in the grocery store. Now, to set expectation, these conversations are purposely long form and mostly unedited, structured in 2 parts. One is all about the founder, who the person is, what their specific background is, and why they started the brand. We do it this way because as early stage investors, the founder is often the most important thing that we are evaluating. Are they the right person to take on the challenge, and what makes them uniquely positioned to execute? So founder first is always how we open. Part 2 dives into the business itself, where things stand today, what's working, what the challenges are, and what the brand is building towards. It's meant to be educational, informative, and a chance to introduce you to an exciting new brand and hopefully find some inspiration for what you're building on your own. We hope you enjoy the show. It's a great one today. But before we get to that, a quick word from our season 4 sponsor, Pelagic, the supply chain company. Pelagic is a team of experienced supply chain operators who work alongside emerging CPGs as their businesses grow. They specialize in building systems and scaling efficiently across key parts of the business, like product manufacturing, inventory, and 3PL management, as well as general ops advisory. We chose Pelagic as our first content sponsor because we've seen their work firsthand, and it's really impressive stuff. So if you're a founder or CPG ops leader listening to this and your supply chain is holding you back, Pelagic can help. Reach out to them via their website and tell them Paperboy sent you. All right, without further ado, let's get to the episode. Presenting Ian Tecklin and Ripi Foods.
So I grew up in New York in Westchester, went to school at Syracuse, where I majored in television, radio, film, and finance. I was always passionate about entertainment my whole life, thought I would be on the business side of entertainment. And so first job out of college was at this premium TV network, Epix, which at the time was a JV between Viacom, MGM, and Lionsgate. Uh, and was there on a small 3-person strategy team involved in a number of strategic growth initiatives. We ultimately scaled that business to a $1 billion exit to MGM. And having been on the inside during that transaction, I realized I wanted to get M&A experience and be on the other side of the table and be the individual to, assess whether to acquire or invest in an Epix as opposed to being in an operating role. And so moved out to LA, started working at United Talent Agency, UTA, which is a large global talent agency, and focused on corp dev, so M&A, growth equity investing, and a variety of strategy related initiatives for the agency and its clients. And I joined at this really unique inflection point where shortly after I joined, we kicked off a capital raising process. We did a big equity raise, brought on 2 financial sponsors, and then basically went hunting, and acquired a number of companies across entertainment, sports, and media. I think we acquired 6 agencies, invested in 3 businesses, did the big equity raise, as I mentioned, and was there for a couple of years and loved it, but ultimately felt that I wanted to be on the earlier stage side of things. I felt I was a bit entrepreneurial, and as much as I loved living in Excel and getting deals done, I felt like I had that scrappy nature and founder friendly nature where I wanted to roll up my sleeves a bit more. So moved back to New York, started working at this family office called Maximalist Ventures, where I led early stage investing and new incubations at the fund, and we invested pre-seed to Series A across a number of different categories. And the 2 guys who own the fund also had an ad tech business that I did corp dev at as well. And so it was a very interesting role where I was doing, principal early stage investing at the fund and fund operations, and also new incubations as well. in addition to being in an operating role. And, I got to this inflection point where, I felt like it was time to officially take that leap. The big thing that I'm leaving out in all this related to Rippy is that when I was living in LA, this little thing called COVID happened, and restaurants were shut down as we remember. People were cooking at home more than ever before. And I literally had this light bulb moment when I was walking the freezer aisle and looking at some of the frozen pasta options at this store by me, and thought, why can't the type of quality I'd come to love, as a New Yorker, places like Missy and Lilia and Martuzzi and Via Carota, and John and Vinny's and Felix and Republique, for example, in LA, why can't that type of quality be available in the freezer aisle? And if you can create products that are sophisticated and elevated, but accessible at the same time from an ingredient and pricing perspective, all wrapped up in a brand that's, fun, modern, and bringing energy to a stale category, that it's a really interesting proposition. Ultimately, I didn't think with the world upside down, it was the right time to launch a brand. And so, I moved back to New York. I took that job at the family office, as I mentioned, but I'd been thinking about Rippy every single day, for a number of years. And ultimately, in spring of 2023, decided to dust off all the materials I'd put together a few years prior and spend the next couple months, sort of re-diligencing the opportunity, lining up my co-packer and really understanding the fixed cost structure of this company, where I got to this inflection point in fall of 2023 where I needed to make a go or no-go decision, and took that leap,
Yeah.
started fundraising.
It's
And
Yeah, it's not an uncommon story. I think pretty much everybody, or certainly everybody who's listening to this pod, has had that idea of, here's this product I want to create. I see a hole in the market. I'll say rarely do people actually go and do it. So I want to get to that and really like more about what you really saw and what the opportunity is. But I actually want to jump back to your background, because I think it's really interesting how you come from this finance, entertainment, acquisition, raising, investing background, which is also very uncommon for CPG founders. So it sounds like at UTA, so you acquired a handful of businesses. Those weren't they weren't CPG businesses, though, right? They
not
were
for the
what were
most
you?
part, these primarily from an M&A lens were other agencies, and so we bought, for example, Clutch Sports, the basketball agency. I know you're a basketball guy. And then we layered on a football agency, and we bought a baseball agency. And, in a matter of 9 months, we through M&A had basically created a top 10 sports agency, which I think now is, top five, in the world right now. We
Absolutely.
bought a digital influencer management agency called Digital Brand Architects, which had a CPG business within it called Digital Brand Product. We bought an esports agency. We bought an EDM focused music agency. So these were all adjacent to the core that is UTA in entertainment, traditional entertainment, um, but adjacent and complementary, in terms of creating a diversified, portfolio of agencies, in and around entertainment, sports, and media. And that encompasses a number of, call it, verticals within those, three big areas.
Gotcha. And so that was mostly on the acquisition front, and your role within that, were you diligencing those deals?
Yes.
What were you doing?
I was diligencing everything. We were a small three person when I joined, four-person when I left, M&A group. And so we were evaluating, a number of prospective acquisition or investment opportunities, and also just general corporate strategy for the agency. If we wanted to do a big play in live events, for example, what does that look like from a strategic or go-to-market perspective? If we wanted to enter sports, what did that look like? I remember putting together a 140-page deck outlining, the type of approach we should be making in sports, which led to the execution side of actually getting deals done. Mm. And so in terms of getting, it's diligencing the financials, understanding, what's happened in the business over the last couple of years, what's happening from a competitive lens, and then doing all of the related valuation work and legal diligence to get the deals done.
Yeah, it's amazing background for what you're taking on now on the business side of things in the family office role. So that was the role you jumped into in New York. I think was that, when did you start that? Was that 23 or
That was in
earlier?
2020. I did a
2020.
year remote when I was in LA. And then, yeah, moved back.
And then in that role, you were making investments. You weren't acquiring
Now
businesses.
we were
And
investing pre-seed to Series A across, a number of different categories. We did some consumer. We did a lot of blockchain and Web3, enterprise software, data and measurement companies. We also incubated two businesses in the consumer space as well. So that was really my first sort of exposure to consumer. I think ultimately it comes back to this whole notion of, one, I've been passionate about the food space my entire life. Two, I've always felt like I had this entrepreneurial bug, um, and was a bit envious of the founders and early stage operators I met along the way, and told myself I wouldn't leave a nice, comfortable situation and dive into this crazy world of entrepreneurship unless I had a high level of conviction around whatever idea I came up with. And, Rippy is just that.
yeah, so you know, really unique background on the business side of things. Would love to get into the food side, which is also, I would say, just as important in a business like the one that you're running. Talk to us about that. What's your food background? Food. I know you're a big foodie, but just elaborate on that, please.
Yeah, huge passion for food my whole life. I feel like I was very lucky. My mom, both my parents work, my whole life, still do, and my mom is just fantastic home chef, just made meals, for us growing up that were delicious, and sort of exposed me to the call it power of food early on, and bringing people together and forming family, memories. And my dad, who can't cook for his life, is incredibly passionate about the food space, but really from a restaurant lens. And so, remember, he'd drive me to different places, in and around New York to try different spots, a restaurant he had seen. And so it's early on, food has been such an important part of my life, going to different types of restaurants of all kinds, uh, and really having that home, experience. I've cooked for as long as I can remember. And so food has served as a backbone of my life. My wife is into food as much as I am. And so I knew, deep down, if I ever were to start a company, it would likely be in food at some point, as much as, my professional life revolved around the entertainment world.
Right. And when you finally made the decision to get into frozen ravioli, frozen pasta, that's very specific. So maybe go back to how you first made that call that, like, this is the right space, the right category. You have the expertise to pull it off.
Yeah, I it's not hyperbole when I say it literally was this light bulb moment. I was happy in my current role at the time. This was 2020. I wasn't actively looking for new uh, companies to join or to, let alone found. And literally, it was this light bulb moment. It was this sort of perfect storm. As I mentioned, restaurants were shut down. People were cooking at home more than ever before. The freezer aisle felt, like this beacon of discovery almost. You saw um, Mila pop off at the time, which was like a great example. They were doing more D2C, but I just literally had this light bulb moment looking at some of the frozen pasta options when I was doing my weekly grocery run. And I thought, why can't this be improved? I felt that there was a product and brand issue in the category, and that the product I felt was subpar. And from a branding perspective, no one really has any sort of brand affinity or emotional connection or built in, brand equity to, any existing incumbents. And so I thought that, there could be something there. And literally I remember going back home and I started diligencing the market like I would diligence, a prospective deal, looking at the size of the TAM, looking at what's happening from a macro industry perspective, looking at the competitive set. And I, again, at the same time, Graza was popping off online, Fishwife was popping up online. And so I thought that there was a really interesting brand angle to be had here. And I discovered also that, the average brand in the frozen pasta category today is 65 years old. And everyone's focused on the same basic standard flavors like cheese, spinach and cheese, mushroom, butternut squash. The packaging's fairly similar. And so I thought, it was an interesting opportunity to, you know, reinvent, things from a branding perspective and bring energy to a stale category while meshing the product that I had come to love, from restaurants I've been to, but also from home cooked meals that I've enjoyed as well, that I felt was lacking. And, you know, ultimately that was sort of phase one, and then got into the nitty gritty of identifying co-packers and getting into, more granular details around what unit economics look like and what the fixed cost structure of this business, but ultimately sort of starting high level and then winnowing it down from there. And it's that sort of methodical approach, and being thoughtful, in not trying to move too quickly or do everything all at once, where I think that's just a direct result of my professional background, which I think is, advantageous.
Yeah. So it's been a journey over the last, I'll say, 6 years. And idea first was planted in your mind around COVID. Took 3 years to incubate it and build it until the point where you hit your conviction and you decided to move it forward. Can you talk about that moment and what you've done in the months and the year leading up to releasing the product?
Yeah.
Would love
It's
to hear
so
about that.
funny when you say, because technically, yes, it is 6 years in the making, but there's a big, pause in between that. So thought of it in summer of 2020, and can get into, the involvement of Joe, our chef, and what happened, during COVID from a product development lens, which I'm sure we'll get into. But thought of it in 2020, shelved the idea at the time. I didn't revisit it until 3+ years later. And, again, it was spring of 2023 where I decided to dust off all the materials I'd put together a few years prior, and, spent the next couple months in 2023 rediligencing, the market, lining up my co-packer, really understanding the fixed cost structure of this business from, unit economics, COGS all the way down to OpEx, where ultimately I got to this inflection point in fall of 2023 where I needed to make a go or no go decision. I had taken it as far as I could, and now I needed to make that leap. I knew, what the go to market looked like. I knew how much money I needed to raise, where that, capital would be deployed, how much runway that would give me. And I had a lot of conviction around, the overall opportunity first and foremost. And so quit my job in September of 2023, started fundraising in October of 2023. We'd raised, about little over $1 million pre-launch from October 2023 to January of 2024. And then, from February to December of 2024, that was just a big behind the scenes build year for us. And so working with our agency, for all branding work, brand strategy, visual identity, logo, packaging design, web design, working with our co-packer on product development and R&D to take the recipes we had developed on a small scale and go through dozens of iterations to commercialize them and, make them feasible at scale. And then we officially, started talking to retailers in December of 2024 and officially launched the business February of last year. So we literally just celebrated our 1 year anniversary yesterday. And so it's been a long time coming though.
Yeah. Wow. So it's about a year and a half from when you raised the initial seed capital to
Yeah.
actually getting product in
Yeah, a
market.
little under. It was like 3 months of fundraising and then a full year of building, behind the scenes, getting everything ready.
Right. And, it's, I think outside people in the CPG industry get this and how long it actually takes to develop a legitimate product that's differentiated versus what's out there. But it is a grind, and a lot of it is done behind the scenes. People don't know what you're doing, and it takes a long time to get that out there. The year of 2024, I know you finalized the product. I want to get to that in a minute, but would love to start on the team side, because I think one of the most important moves that you made early was bringing on Joe. And for those who don't, Joe Sasto is involved with the brand. He's a celebrity chef, and Ian, I'll let you talk to Let's start with Joe on the food side, and then I know you've got a handful of other names on the operational side of the industry that are also big. So can you talk about that experience in
Absolutely.
recruiting and
Yeah. So
building?
Joe Sasto is our chief culinary officer, friend and fantastic chef, known for his pasta making, on TikTok and Instagram. And, in starting this business, I knew I had a fantastic palate, and I could recognize good flavor and I knew what the market needed, but I'm, the average home. I'd like to think I'm better than the average home cook, but I'm not a professional chef, and I knew I wanted someone who was, bar none, the best pasta chef in the country. In my eyes, it's Joe. He humbly would probably reject that, but it was during COVID. When I had mentioned I first thought of this idea, I thought of Joe. My favorite show in the world to this day is Top Chef. I had seen Joe on Top Chef twice. He was actually, yeah, he was on Top Chef twice, and he was known for his pasta making. And I just DM'd him in summer of 2020, saying, "Hey, I hate to say I was a huge fan, but I literally fanboyed and said, 'Hey, big fan. I have a crazy idea for a pasta venture. Can I tell you more about it?'" And we hopped on the phone, and coincidentally, he lived 5 minutes away from me in LA. And so for the next 6 to 8 months in COVID, all summer and fall, heading into that winter in 2020, every week he would drop off a different stuffed pasta, different filling, different shape, different dough. I mean, we have a recipe book of 70 to 80 iterations of different stuff that we had formulated. Um, and I just knew, he was the right guy to come on board. And, we struck a deal early on. And, even when I shelved the idea at the time, we stayed in touch and remained friends. And so when it came time to revisit, because again, I had been thinking about this business every single day and probably texting him, weekly, if not monthly, we got to launch this at some point. But he was my first call when I made that decision to officially, pursue it. And, we haven't looked back. And his role really, he serves two capacities for us. One, from a product development lens, he develops all the initial recipes on a small scale, and then we work with our co-packer to commercialize them and make them feasible at scale. And then the second is promotionally. He has a built-in audience, a really loyal, engaged audience that he's uh, grown, meaningfully. I think when I met him, and him and I dispute the numbers, but when I met him in summer of 2020, it's like he had 10,000 followers on just Instagram, and now he's nearly 1 million across Instagram and TikTok um, and YouTube. And so promotionally brings a ton of value, in terms of content that he produced and collabs that he helps out with.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you broke through with him, and it sounds like you've just been following him since he was earlier on in his journey as well, because I'm sure he gets messages all the time that, "Hey, I want to launch this product. Can you
Yeah,
help
it's
me
like this
develop it?"
perfect.
Why did he listen to you?
Yeah, it was like this perfect storm where uh, he had been working for restaurants for most of his life, and decided around the time that we had met, maybe a little before that, he was done with the restaurant game. He wanted to bet on himself and become a full-time creator. Mind you, all of the creators that, not all, but so many of the fantastic food creators you see today that are so popular got their start during COVID because they were, working in restaurants.
What else were they going to do?
And
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
and
you got to
it's
build
really
a
amazing
build
to
the
see.
business.
And, he sort of, uh, not that he, was a first mover here, but like made that move before that whole wave, and has obviously yielded the results accordingly, but felt that he was a bit entrepreneurial too, and had this idea for a pasta chip business that he wanted to do with another partner that's unrelated to us, and wanted to create content and connect more directly with his fans, and appear on TV shows and write a cookbook and do brand collabs, like all of these different things. He's such a talent and such a great personality. uh, you don't get those opportunities working, in a traditional uh, restaurant role. Like, you just don't. And so it was just, again, this perfect storm of where he was in his life, what was happening, from a macro lens, that opened up this opportunity for Rippy, and where I was, how I was thinking about things. And it just, worked out.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it's credit to you. It seems like you've got a skill in recruiting, and when you think about some of the other names that are involved with this project, you've got Kendall Dickinson, who I believe was involved with Graza early on, and David from Dream Pop. So, yeah, can you just highlight a few of your other team members and also how you're getting all these people? It seems like you're a bit of a magician in that sense, but I think also it's by design of how you're running the business, and seems that you're willing to share equity with those that deserve it and add value to the business, which I appreciate, because I think that's the right way to do things, especially as you're building from the
Yeah.
ground up.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Look, I as much as this is my company, I'm a solo founder. I'm the only employee of Ripi right now. I knew early on it was important to surround myself with folks who can help fill in the gaps where I lack. And I want the best of the best, and I've been fortunate where you know, yes, it's me pitching them, but also the idea for Rippy is such a strong one where, I send someone a deck, or I give them the pitch live and talk to them about it. It just makes complete sense, and it excites people, whenever I talk about it and they want to come on board. And, you know, I wanted a chef. I wanted the best pasta chef in my eyes in the country to be involved with this. Joe was that guy, and we struck a deal that, worked for both of us. And then just fractionally, I wanted to surround myself with advisors, and fractional partners in the sense of Kendall, who can help, fill in the gaps and educate me in areas that, I thought were really important. Again, I don't come from the world of CPG. I don't come from frozen. I didn't know a thing about frozen pasta before launching this company. And you just learn by doing, obviously. And I, work incredibly hard and before and now, obviously. And, it's part of it is educating myself on it, but also having the right, folks around me to educate me as well. And so Kendall, I was, blown away with all of the work that she had done with Graza. She'll never admit it out loud, but I believe that she's, solely, if not incredibly responsible for everything that they've done from a social lens and their brand today. I wanted her to replicate that for Rippy. And so she was an advisor early on. She then segued into a fractional head of social role for us. And then I have three other advisors who each bring a different skill set to the table. Dave Greenfeld is the founder and CEO of Dream Pops, so knows firsthand what it's like to start a frozen brand in a, call it, legacy category, and is very helpful in helping me navigate the landmines, to avoid. And, also is just very good from a sales and marketing lens. Jeff Gendelman, used to be a private equity investor, then worked at Califia, then was the CEO of Daring more recently. Was very smart, in all things frozen from a finance ops perspective. And again, helping me avoid the landmines, as we continue to scale. And then the last is Sam Franklin, who's one of my closest friends, works at his family office. That also is, a major investor in Rippy as well. And he's just a fantastic sounding board and an operating partner in the trenches with me. Because being a solo founder is a lonely journey, obviously, but having a sounding board and someone, to help keep you in check, is incredibly valuable.
Couldn't agree more. As a fellow solo founder, and I have those people around me, and it's wildly helpful. So, to shift gears for a minute, would love to dig in further on the product itself and how you make it and what the process is. And I heard you mention, you didn't know much about frozen food, and I think that could actually be an advantage.
Yes.
Ignorance can be bliss, and you're surrounding yourself with people that know the industry well. But a lot of people think frozen's a nightmare
Yes.
To deal with operationally, which it is. Margins are lower and all that, but I know you come from the right background to make that work. To the product itself, yeah, just talk to us about how you're making it today and why it's different than what's out there.
Yeah. As I mentioned, the frozen pasta category is filled with for the most part, conventional value brands from legacy companies. It historically is a very slow moving category from a velocity perspective because there's been no one who has brought energy, to the aisle. There hasn't been a reason to meaningfully accelerate velocities. And from a product lens, you're looking at the same flavors across the board: cheese, spinach and cheese, mushroom, butternut squash. Now, maybe you'll see an Italian sausage or chicken and garlic every now and then, but these are primarily conventional value brands. And don't get me wrong, there's always going to be a market for those types of products. I'm not knocking that at all. My bet is there's a large swath of the population in every small town, city, state around the country of folks who appreciate good food and are looking for something a bit more sophisticated, a bit more elevated, that's accessible from an ingredient and pricing perspective at the same time. And so our products strike that right balance. Each box is $9.99, feeds two people comfortably. That's $5 of value per person. But we're using frozen pasta as a vehicle to empower the average home chef and really help them elevate their weeknight meals. And so when we first launched, we had 3 SKUs: a braised short rib ravioli with Swiss chard, Parmesan, and red wine; a chicken parm ravioli with crushed tomatoes, mozz, and basil; a sweet potato ravioli with brown butter, rosemary, and maple. We just introduced our 4th last month, where we launched nationwide with Whole Foods. And so we have an exclusive SKU with them. That's a cacio e pepe ravioli. And then we have a 5th SKU launching, in the spring, which is, incredibly exciting as well. But ultimately for us, it's about really, again, striking that right balance between being elevated, but being accessible. And again, just using frozen pasta as a vehicle to empower the average home chef and help them elevate their weeknight meals. I can't repeat that enough because that's the core, ethos of who we are and what we create and, why we create it.
Right. And with the formulation, I think you mentioned that you and Joe work on that together, and then you bring that to a co-packer to create the finished product, and it's flash frozen on site. Is that the accurate
Yeah.
summary?
So Joe is sort of the first step in the process. I'll work with him on a small scale to develop the initial recipe. And, we've gotten very good in terms of creating products that, are efficient at scale, where in 2024, it took us nearly a whole year to commercialize these recipes and go through dozens of iterations. Our cacio e pepe, for example, that we launched with Whole Foods, that took us less than a day to go, to retail ready product. Like we flew out to our co-packer, we knocked it out in a day. The new SKU we're launching in the spring, same thing. So we've gotten very efficient because we know, one, first and foremost, the types of products we should be making should strike, again, that balance between being sophisticated and accessible. 2, they have to make sense from a margin, profile perspective. That's probably the most important thing. We're not going to create a product that, is not scalable. And 3, we know the type of machinery and process and personnel we're working with at our command. And so we know we could sort of reverse engineer, the types of products we should be making, because we know we can't create something that's so overly complex, from a supply chain or process perspective. And so we've gotten very good at that. But still now there's a level of refinement that we're braising our short rib at scale. Like, who's doing that? And, we braise short rib, we roast sweet potatoes to, make this sweet potato puree that we mix in brown butter and maple and rosemary for, our sweet potato ravioli, our chicken parm. We're braising this chicken and we're making a tomato passata from scratch and mixing in our mozz and parm. Like, all of this literally has replicated the exact quality that Joe had made on a small scale, which is why, R&D and product development, behind the scenes took a year, because I needed to replicate Joe's quality at scale. I wasn't going to rush this thing to market. The margins had to make sense, but first and foremost, the product quality had to be there. And so we spent a lot of time and put a lot of effort and care and love into our products. And, it starts with the filling. It obviously starts with the dough as well, because, I think the dough is the most important aspect of a pasta. I think we have the best pasta product in the country, and it starts with the dough. We spend so much time on our dough. but we're making all of the ravioli and then flash freezing it immediately. And so what that does is it locks in that flavor, locks in that freshness, and preserves that nutritional value and enables a 12-month shelf life. And so you can treat us as a convenient indulgence, if you will, where you could park us in your freezer for up to 12 months, though I hope you'd eat us sooner than that. And simply tear us open, drop us in boiling water, and, enjoy.
Yeah, I know people are listening to this, so they're not necessarily going to try the product alongside this pod, though you can go get it at Whole Foods if you're out there. We first met close to a year ago, and you came into my office and set up a little pot and cooked it. It's delicious.
Thank
So,
you.
nice work getting to where you've gotten it. And I think it speaks to how you think about the ingredient base and sourcing and putting everything together.
Thank you. By the way, that
So,
pot is the best ROI I've had in this business. That
has to
portable
be.
stovetop, $11.99 on Amazon. Those like little Bunsen burners that you had in chemistry class growing up. Plug it in, you have boiling water in 8 to 10 minutes, and pasta on demand wherever.
You can get to people's hearts pretty quickly when you're serving fresh pasta.
Fresh
that
frozen. That's
is,
what we're all
yeah,
about.
fresh frozen. Exactly. So good stuff on the product side. Let's shift into the go-to-market strategy and how you're approaching that. So, sounds like year one for you in terms of selling was 2025, right?
Yeah, we officially launched the business a year ago yesterday. So mid to late February of 2025. The focus, from the get-go, this is a traditional retail play. This is not a D2C brand per se. But the focus from a go-to-market lens at the outset was identify a number of key regions across the country and a number of more independent specialty stores in those regions to frankly validate the proof of concept, demonstrate market traction, and get our skis under us operationally, and be buttoned up so that when the big players came knocking, we'd be ready. And I had done enough research where I knew what the frozen pasta set looks like in every single one of these retailers, where I humbly knew that these large logo accounts would come knocking early. And sure enough, Whole Foods came to us early, within a few months of us launching, saying they want to launch us nationwide. We officially launched nationwide with Whole Foods last month. But really last year was about these more independent specialty store accounts, and we've sort of validated the proof of concept there, and just have a number of really exciting stores. We're rolling out to north of 2,000 stores over the next 3 months alone, and so there's clear traction there, and I think it just speaks volumes to the white space opportunity here. And I'm incredibly humbled and energized by the traction we had to date and the reception from consumers and the frozen category managers and retail buyers who are these gatekeepers and seem to be loving what we're selling.
Yeah. So you launched independently to build up the traction that you needed to prove it out first and then get into national retail. And with Whole Foods, it's pretty amazing they came to you. Almost everybody everybody's pitching Whole Foods
Well,
desperately
don't get me
trying to
wrong,
get in.
we were pitching, and initially they said we were too early because we had pitched them when we were pre-launch. And then a situation came up where they had an opportunity in the set and said, "Would you guys be interested?" And we said, "Absolutely." So it's sort of right time, right place. But again, it speaks to the brand that we've built, or at least the brand that we've started to put together, and the product that we have as well.
Right. So, it took a few conversations to get you into Whole Foods, but it's really a function of the product, the brand that you built and what's missing
Yeah,
overall in the market.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned you can't do D2C. It's an interesting question of, should you not? It's got to be close to impossible to make
We
any
tried
money
it.
there.
We tried it.
Yeah.
I think we had D2C up from like September to December of last year. We're winding it down now. We winded it down on Amazon because with Whole Foods, we'll be on Amazon very shortly. D2C is still live on our website right now, though we're winding that down shortly, and we'll be just externally linking people to our Whole Foods Amazon page. But I did want to just test the waters. I ran the numbers and we could, make the margins work at a higher AOV. And I wanted to just test it out. To me, it just comes down to bandwidth and opportunity costs. We are a team of one. It's just me right now. We have so much momentum in retail. I think, when you launch a business, you have to sort of early on decide whether, you're a retail brand or you're a D2C brand or you're purely wholesale. I think if you try to do both or everything all at once, especially as a very lean team, then you're going to sacrifice something. And so I want to just be very disciplined in making sure that we're building the best retail brand in the category that we can and not be distracted operationally from a bandwidth or capital perspective in things that don't really move the needle. Do I think DSC could work if we dedicated the right resources? Maybe, but I also know we have so much momentum in retail right now, and I want to put all of my eggs in that basket.
Yeah, and the vast majority, I don't know, 95% of that volume has to be already at retail. And
More
e-com, I
so,
think,
absolutely.
it can be a place where you find, brand ambassadors, people that are passionate about your product, but totally agree on the focus. You've got to fish where the fish
I
are
also
to
think
start.
from a product lens, people aren't used to buying frozen pasta online, and so there's that psychological hurdle. It's not like other categories where people are used to just instinctively putting it in their carts. And two, um, our our product, frozen, obviously requires insulated packaging and dry ice and liners and you know the shipping fees involved because you have to overnight it or 2 day it. We had to have an AOV of $100 for this to make sense, and so $100 a 6 pack. It's more than our per unit retail price, and that's another psychological hurdle. Are people used to spending $100 for pasta online? That was something I wanted to test. We tested it. I didn't, invest meaningfully in any paid social. I just wanted to sort of see what organic demand looked like. We ran some campaigns on Amazon, but ultimately knowing, retail taking off, I thought it was better to just focus on that.
For sure. So retail is taking off. You're expanding into thousands of doors this year. How's it been? What are you learning out there, and what's in the plans for just this year? We'll stick
Yeah.
to this year.
Very, very excited and energized and humbled by the traction to date. There's a clear void in the market, and look, this business has been 6 years in the making, as we talked about. And I just could not be more bullish on what we're selling. From a macro lens, I still think we're in the top of the first inning as it relates to this whole premiumization of the freezer aisle, but that's where the world is going. And, frozen is red hot right now. You look at other stale, call it legacy categories that have been disrupted by, challenger brands. And you could see the type of innovation that's possible, whether it's, Mila and Laubon in the dumpling space.
Kevin's Natural is
Yeah,
probably the best example
absolutely.
recently.
Evergreen in the waffle space, Jesse and Ben's with their fries in the frozen veggie space, True Fruit in the novelty space. There's example after example of all of these really innovative new emerging companies that are ushering in this whole, wave of excitement, in frozen. And I think just from a macro lens, we're riding that. Frozen pasta has historically been overlooked. It's, I would say, one of the last few untouched categories in the grocery store. Um, and so we, are really excited about being that company to usher in this level of excitement through frozen pasta. Um, and
Yeah.
so it's been good that, again, it's resonating with consumers. They clearly see a need. Uh, Retail buyers and category managers are loving it. And, anecdotally, I don't want to bore you with the TAM of frozen pasta, but just anecdotally, you ask someone, or I could ask you, how often do you eat frozen pasta? They'll probably say, not really that much. And you think, Stouffer's or Lean Cuisine, that's what frozen pasta is. And again, don't get me wrong, there's uh, always going to be a market for products like that, but we're flipping those preconceived notions around their head around what frozen is, specifically frozen pasta, and convincing people that the freezer aisle can in fact be a destination for delicious food. And so, that started to bear fruit, and, it's just incredibly exciting to see in these early days.
I think one of the biggest questions on my mind is how do you actually drive velocity in that category? Because the marketing support, it's super difficult. It's not like you can, set up additional displays easily and, support it with a field sales team, and e-com opportunities are limited, and it's a set that historically produces very low turns.
Absolutely.
So how do you actually go about doing
Yeah,
that?
it's probably one of the slowest moving categories in CPG, which is weirdly enough what excites me most about this whole business, because it's an opportunity to change that, and to bring energy to a stale category. Um, in the likes that, you know, Fishwife did in Tin Fish, disrupting Starkist and Bumblebee, or Gras in olive oil, or Saws in pasta sauce. Name a category that has disrupted legacy businesses. But you're right. There are very limited merchandising opportunities. We're sort of limited to that one freezer door for the most part. There are some ancillary opportunities, but for me, my biggest focus, this year is really about doing everything we can to drive top of funnel brand awareness. And again, I don't mean to say we have this grow at all costs mindset. Always have to be thoughtful in terms of how we're allocating and deploying capital. But from a marketing lens, it's what can we do to drive top of funnel brand awareness? Because I'm convinced our product is that good that once someone tries it, they'll become a recurring buyer, but it's getting someone to that first point, and so there's a number of levers that we can pull to do that, from an in-store perspective, running promos that help incentivize, the average shopper. From a social perspective, we've got our own organic channel, Kendall, helping out, on social, and we're doing a lot from a creator collab and influencer collab and partnership perspective to sort of piggyback off of these creators who have large audiences and create content that's engaging and innovative and getting the word out for Rippy. We have Joe, who obviously has a sizable audience, and even with Joe, we've been doing a number of experiential pop-ups, really sort of a grassroots approach to get the word out there. And then recently brought on a firm to help out with retail media and shopper marketing, and we'll be getting paid social as well. So there's 5 or 6 levers that we can pull, and we'll be flexing them up and down accordingly. But again, the overall goal is to drive that top of funnel brand awareness, so that when someone's either in the freezer aisle, and they see us, it's like, oh, I've been seeing or hearing about that brand. I want to give it a try. Or they happen to go to the grocery store and, have Rippy on their mind and want to try it. It's about being that destination brand and being top of mind, so that someone, decides to buy a box when they happen to be in the store.
Yeah, and I think, even getting on shelf is typically the number one brand awareness driver. Most people are
That's the biggest
discovering these new
billboard.
brands for the first time.
100%. That's what I didn't even mention that. Just organically, I don't know how many people walk the freezer aisle, a day, but that's our biggest marketing vehicle. Is just the packaging on the shelf, and we pop relative to our competitors. And so the average person, I would like to assume, who has never heard of Rippy or seen Rippy, but they see us on the shelf relative to our peers, they would want to try us as a result.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. And then I guess the next question is how to get people to try it, and driving that it could be sampling. It depends on the retailer, on who allows you to do that. And I think you also have some other news to break on what's coming from a retail standpoint this year.
You have a drum roll effect. We so excited to officially announce it here. This is a Paperboy exclusive. We are going to be launching in over 1,100 Target stores late April of this year. So in 2 months, you can find us in over 1,100 Target stores. They'll have 4 SKUs. They'll have our cacio pepe. They'll have our braised short rib. They'll have our sweet potato. And they'll have a 4th, which is an exclusive with them that I'm not going to reveal right now, but it's absolutely delicious, and really excited to, get the word out.
Fantastic. It's great stuff. So really, with the progression of where you're headed, you were in what, a couple hundred stores last year?
Yeah,
You're going to go to
we ended last year 320 stores. We're in north of 800 now. We're rolling out to, over 2,000 over the next couple months. 1,100 of that are Target. And we have some other exciting regional stores to announce as well soon. But yeah, just incredibly excited. The Target team is absolutely fantastic. They've been great partners, in helping us get to this stage. And, just again, really humbled to see that a preeminent retailer like them, similar to Whole Foods, that they're leaning into innovation, and that they see from a macro lens what's happening in terms of this whole premiumization of the freezer aisle, and believe in Rippy enough to plant the flag accordingly for us.
Yeah, and the flavor innovation side of it, I think, is maybe the most interesting part of it all. And you just don't see the cacio e pepe flavor too much, especially in your subcategory. I'd say it's culturally it's popping up everywhere, but you've got some room to run in that set, and it kind of brings up we could chat for another hour, but we only have 5 minutes to wrap. Would love to hear your perspective on what is the future of this brand. Is it to continue to build in frozen ravioli? Are you always going to stay frozen? What's the outlook?
The North Star is to be the number one player in frozen pasta. This is not an Italian brand in the sense of us getting into jarred sauces and cured meats and vinegars and all, like, that's not us. I see so much growth within frozen pasta that our North Star again is to be that number one player. And, there's a number of areas that we can play in and around the freezer aisle that all are different pasta products, frozen pasta products that serve either a different customer or occasion, that enables us to really build a diversified portfolio of frozen pasta products in and around, that freezer aisle. I'd say phase
Yeah.
one is this, where we're at now. It's this 9-ounce box. We have soon 5 SKUs. We'll probably cap that at 8. If you think in an ideal world, we'll take over 2 rows, 4 and 4. And then there's a number of buckets that we'd like to get into to, again, serve a different customer type, serve a different occasion. And, what really excites me, Giovanni Rana is a refrigerated brand in the stuffed pasta category. They've built a fantastic business. They're doing, north of $1 billion of sales a year in the US. Tony's probably the number 2. And then there's a steep drop off of brands doing, anywhere from 3 to 30 million, but there's no clear category leader in frozen. And so my goal is to be that number 1 player in frozen pasta and the number 3 player overall, across refrigerated and frozen behind Ron and Tony. That's sort of what drives me and how we get there. It's continued distribution, across retail. It's exploring wholesale and food service and restaurant supply opportunities internationally, potentially, but really the most important is product development.
Could you do refrigerated as well, or why not do refrigerated? Why frozen over refrigerated in your mind?
Well, I think frozen lends itself a couple things. I think refrigerated beats us right now from a perception standpoint, in that people assume refrigerated pasta is fresher. I actually disagree, and that's one of the things that we need to do better from an education perspective in convincing people why, frozen is better. I find the refrigerated pasta, the dough tends to be gummy. There's really a shelf life consideration there, because you buy it, you have to eat it within a week or 2, or you open it, you only have a matter of days. For us, frozen pasta, we're flash freezing, and so you lock in that flavor, that freshness, preserving the nutritional value, but you're affording the convenience for the customer where, again, they can park you in your freezer for 12 months or in their freezer for 12 months, and they can enjoy it as is whenever they want. So I view us from a usability perspective, almost like dried pasta, where someone has a box of, dried penne or spaghetti that they just stick in their pantry, and it's a sort of always on product for their pasta night, which they have once or twice a week. For us, frozen pasta, why can't we have that same usability where you park us in your freezer for your pasta night once or twice a week? And so I think frozen, from a macro lens, there is a very clear white space in being the category leader, because we weren't dealing with some of these larger players that you see in refrigerated. And so I thought it was a better place to innovate and plant our flag. And then from a product development lens, I think it affords a better product and better consumer experience.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think your point on educating the consumer is a good one, though. And while people are waking up every day more and more to the food products that they're bringing into their household and what ingredients are looking like and all of that, it's still a heavy, expensive lift to shift people over, and it's going to take years. But sounds like you're in this for the long haul,
Absolutely.
which you need to be. So just to close this out here, would love to hear your perspective on what's the goal here? Where do you see Rippy going in the next few years?
Yes, we're going to continue to innovate from a product development lens. As I mentioned, the goal is to build a portfolio of diverse products in and around the freezer aisle. We have our fifth SKU launching in the spring. Um, there's a couple of new SKUs that we're thinking of right now. We have initial thoughts around new types of products we'd like to launch, probably next year. But really, the focus right now is on execution. Really with Whole Foods, and then shortly with Target when we launch. Those are marquee accounts for us. Obviously, I care about all of the accounts that we're currently in, but those two specifically really move the needle from a velocity and revenue perspective, and want to make sure that we're, like our existing stores, fully supporting it, to the best of our ability. And so always, again, just going to be thoughtful in terms of where we allocate capital and resources. We got to get these first 4 or 5 SKUs right with these, marquee clients before expanding too quickly. But, you'll see us in the coming years continue to innovate, from a product development lens and launching new SKUs and products. You'll see us continue to scale our points of distribution, across retail, because we want to be, again, that number one player in frozen pasta and build this preeminent brand, in frozen. And so that obviously takes time, but that's what's really driving me every single day.
Well said, Ian. Congrats on everything that you've done, and we're all rooting for you. So thanks for coming on the
Thanks,
show.
thanks for having
And
me. It's been fun.
yeah, of course, excited to see what you do with it and try out all these new varieties you got launching this year. So well
Absolutely.
done.